We'll just be in the front by the bike area. Like, you know how they have those side mics, so just be ready to be like, hello, everybody. It's me again.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Mylène Simard. I'm an event facilitator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory and that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene people, and also the nation of the Métis people. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're gathered here tonight to celebrate the launch of Around the Kitchen Table Métis Aunties Scholarship, a collection that centers the strong aunties and grandmothers who have shaped Métis communities, cultures, and identities with teachings shared in classrooms, auditoriums, and around the kitchen table. We're grateful to the University of Manitoba Press for publishing this volume and for arranging this celebratory evening. Following some conversation around the book, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. If you're one of those in person, I ask that you wait. I will come to you with microphone so that we can hear you on the live stream. And if you are watching from home, just type in your questions in the chat and we will do our best to pass it along. I'll be back at the closing of the event to review signing procedures. We'll just be asking you to stay seated while we transport those of you who will be signing books over to the signing table. We now have the pleasure of hearing from co-editor Laura Forsythe. Laura Forsythe, PhD, is a Mitchell Assistant Professor at the University of Winnipeg in the Faculty of Education. Forsythe's research focus is Métis-specific contributions to the Academy, Métis inclusive efforts, Métis research, methodologies, and educational sovereignty. She's also the elected Bison local chairperson of the Manitoba Métis Federation. Please join me in welcoming her.
Merci. I'm shorter than everyone else I'll be speaking with, so I'll just tilt up. That's true, that's true. Well, I'll begin. Thank you so much for the land acknowledgement. I'll just add a little bit to that. I love to open spaces in Michif, because that's what many of us do. So I'll say, dans le terrain de Nikinakegwa, dans les Anishinaabe, le Cree, le Uji Cree, le Sioux, puis le Dene, le Nishtum, le Pi, le campus, University of Manitoba, P, University of Winnipeg, where we work and live and study and spend most of our time. So I want to acknowledge that and acknowledge this land. And specifically, thank you for mentioning Roostertown. I'm going to call it Pecan Town because that's what we called it. And it was actually not just Métis people, but my family lived there. 149 acres of where we are sitting today belonged to my family before it was removed for various reasons and various methods of dispossession. I want to put that out there, know that we're here and we're in this space, and this space should be mine. So I brought with me a purse that was crocheted by my great aunt and a brooch that belonged to my great grandmother, Nora Berard, who was born here on this land. So this isn't a long story I'm telling you. This is a story within my family, within my mother's lived experience. She met a woman who was born here on our land. So I want to give that land acknowledgement to start the day. Now, who am I? Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Maybe you know me already. If you don't, Laura Forsythe, Dishna Kasham, ma famille, Koyesh, Roostertown, Ashtuak, Winnipeg, Wikioak. So today we live in Winnipeg. I don't even live near Grand Park. So I actually live in Westwood, which is actually another Métis space we could talk about another day. But today we're here to talk about this incredible collection. So they said, you have to read a little bit about it. So well, okay, here we go. I hope I can read today, okay. Now, Janice Acous, if you don't know their work, you must find their work, but I'll start with a quote by them. They said, Acous states that powerful voices can be heard over the influence of white Christian Canadian patriarchy. The body of work by Métis women in Métis studies is a testament not only to their resilience and tenacity, but also their birthright. Métis women have been adaptive, cunning, and essential in supporting their communities throughout history, and those skills have long extended into the academy. The work of Métis women transforms public consciousness and understanding. Throughout history, Métis women have served as influencers outside of colonial gendered implied norms and have provided a basis to the subfield. By highlighting the work of Métis women scholars, the grandmothers, and the generations that follow them, and their contributions to this book demonstrates that while the Academy struggles with a gendered approach that has long been supported by patriarchy, the subfield of Métis studies has consistently supported the women who have contributed so much to its advancement. And so this collection really highlights the voices of women, of Métis women, who are theorists and scholars and artists and poets. They capture their lived experience in the disciplines and areas in which they have dedicated their lives. So we see in this collection women who are archaeologists, anthropologists, political scientists, educators, interdisciplinary artists, land-based educators, health researchers, Canada research chairs, and like directors in Indigenous leadership positions and institutions across the country. Métis women are doing the work, and this book talks about that work, and it highlights to you what they dedicate every moment of their lives to contributing to our community. Tonight we will hear from incredible Métis women who have contributed to this particular volume, and you can get their chapter if you buy this book. But we're going to start with Nicki Ferland, who's going to speak to the cover and the piece of art that inspired it. And then we will have Chantal Fiola, Lucy Fowler, and then I'll come back and talk briefly about my own chapter. And so right now, I'm going to invite Nicki Ferland to come up and share with us the inspiration and the pieces that you see on the book cover. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Oh, I'm just going to set this aside because I got too many papers in front of me. Nicki Dishnakashon and Midshif Desespri Nia, ni Mama Takeegwa, ni Baba Take and Midshif Nia. Lorette Das Chen, Lorette Saint Vital Legua, Se Boniface, mi Paranti Kayesh Das Chiuwak. I'm a two-spirit Métis from Lorette, Manitoba. This is Lorette's new sweet sash. My mother and father are both descended from script-bearing Métis families with ancestral roots in Saint Vital and Saint Boniface and here in Winnipeg, as well as Lorette, Manitoba. I'm a direct descendant of Sarah Goulet, who with her husband Elzéar Lajmazier established a permanent settlement in the community of Lorette, along with other farmers and buffalo hunters back in the 1850s, as well as Margaret Poitras, who is a recognized matriarch of the Métis Nation, and whose father-in-law was André Beauchemin, who was MLA in Louis Riel's provisional government and elected to the riding in Saint Vital from 1870 to 74. My people also include the Grants, the Ducharmes, the Fishers, the Harrisons, and I'm a Red River Métis citizen and harvester registered with the Manitoba Métis Federation and vice chair of the Two-Spirit Mitchif Local. My research explores Métis relationships with urban land in Winnipeg. I'm a land-based educator at the University of Manitoba, and I live in Winnipeg with my wife, Chantal Fiola, who also has a chapter in this beautiful collection, and our daughter, Mireille. So I'm here to share a bit about the cover art, which you see here, which comes from this, was part of a larger story quilt called Her Roots Go Deep. This was the first teaching quilt that I created. I made it when my daughter was 6 months old, and it includes some fun sort of three-dimensional and sensory elements, like, you know, she can play with whatever she wants here. There's meat drying on the fire and some medicines hanging. I said that out of the microphone, but this quilt depicts stories about Métis women in governance, in Métis economies, community, spirituality, and more. There's a lot going on here, and some might say maybe too much, but it's a special quilt to us, and it was a small idea that sort of grew and grew from many kitchen table conversations with my wife about Métis women, about our own grandmothers, and our own lives. My research, which I'll share a little bit more about later when I introduce my chapter, focuses on cishet and two-spirit Métis women's stories about in relationships with the land in Winnipeg specifically. Uncovering these sort of hidden narratives about women is central to my work. And I wanted Mireille to know these stories, to challenge the erasure of Métis women in our history, and to have fun learning about them. So Mireille actually appears in her Tikanagan in this quilt, sharing space with her, so here she is. In her little Tikanagan. So she's sharing space with her ancestors, strong Métis women whose footsteps we're proud to follow in. And in this land, theirs and Mireille's roots go deep. There are many stories embedded in this quilt. I won't be able to share them all tonight, but I will share a few. So here in the sort of upper left-hand corner, Métis women surround the provisional government. It's a reminder that Métis women also held roles in governance and decision-making in our communities and still do. They stand in front of the provisional government to reflect the ways their stories were once overshadowed. I used family pictures of my great-grandmother and Lejmaziad and my wife Chantal's grandmother Dorothy, along with her sisters, here in the back row, and there's my grandma, as well as unnamed women. So the countless Métis women who remain unstoried and narratively domesticated. The women stand above a knotted rope, which represents the Michif concept, Anishka Pichkan. This is the Michif term for both great-grandmother and great-grandchild. It also means the knot in the chain, and it represents those relationships within our kinship structures that give the whole line its strength. So the buffalo hunt scene in the lower left-hand corner speaks to Métis women's responsibilities on the hunt and in community. Huge caravans of squeaky carts carrying whole families, which could be heard from miles away, would gather on the prairies, guided by a strict code known as the laws of the buffalo hunt. Some Métis women served as scouts on the buffalo hunt. Others followed the hunters and skinned the buffalo, dried and pounded the meat to make pemmican. My maternal great-grandmother had bone tools that her mother-in-law used for scraping hides on the stretching rack, which I've depicted here. Women also butchered and prepared the meat. So this is like, really skilled work that we forget about on the hunt, and prepared it for transportation, for smoking, and for drying, and for pounding into pemmican, as I mentioned. The sort of central scene here shows my maternal great-great-grandmother, Margaret Putras, working her farm in Odeshane. It symbolizes the strength and determination of Métis women. The silhouette of the Red and Assiniboine rivers and the province of Manitoba, in part hidden behind this wood stove, so the province and the rivers, is a reminder of our relationships with land and place and our belonging. From Margaret, roots descend, and like all Métis women depicted here, her roots go deep. And the blueberries serve as a reminder of Métis relationships with land and the deep knowledges inherited from our mothers, which include harvesting plants and other natural resources for food, medicine, and technological use. Now, the scene that's depicted on the cover of this collection is right here in the lower right-hand corner. It depicts an important place of Métis cultural production and transmission, the kitchen table. There's a wood stove, bannock or la galette, as we call it in my family, a pair of beaded moccasins on the floor, a scrap quilting squares on the table, and I use this scene to emphasize as well Métis spirituality as a braiding of both Christianity and traditional spirituality. So you can see there's a sort of a lit smudge bowl, Bibles, pipes, some medicines hanging here, drying along with a crucifix. This scene addresses as well the temporal and spatial challenges that art can overcome in renewing our relationships with ancestors by depicting my daughter Mireille in her Tikanagan, leaning on the table, learning through observation, as well as her great-great-grandmother, Margaret La Liberté, sharing space. Mireille is making la galette with kukum in the kitchen. So, Ekoche, thank you, merci.
And for real, the shortest of all the speakers. Bonjour, Nintenewe Maganidag, Sagadi Queen Dishnakas, Bijoni Odem. My name is Dr. Chantal Fiola,
I'm also Michif, Red River Métis, registered citizen of the Manitoba Métis Federation. My Michif family comes from the historic Métis community of Saint-Laurent, as well as Saint-Vital, Saint-Boniface, Saint-Norbert. My father's side comes from Saint-Geneviève. I also have family at Saint-Anne. I am the interim associate vice president for Indigenous engagement at the University of Winnipeg, where I'm also an associate professor in the Department of Urban and Inner City Studies. I'm a member of the Two-Spirit community, and I participate in ceremonies as often as I can. Nicki's my wife. I have ancestors in this beautiful art quilt behind us, as Nicki so eloquently shared with us. I also noticed all of the contributors who are speaking today are the ones in the book whose last name begins with the letter F. So my chapter is called Prenatal Postpartum Ceremonies and Parenting as Michif Self-Determination. My motivation for writing this particular chapter was twofold. First of all, publications on Métis relationships with ceremonies are few and far between, not because Métis people don't ceremony, but because of the legacy of colonization. Elsewhere, I have written extensively about why the stereotype that all Métis people are Catholic exists. Thankfully, in the present day, more and more Métis people are increasingly reconnecting with ceremonies. My second motivation for writing this chapter is because publications written by 2S LGBTQ Métis folks are also few and far between. But thankfully there too, more and more of us are using our voices and publishing. So I'm hoping to do my part to try to help widen a path for Two-Spirit Michif families who ceremony. My chapter is essentially the story of finding and reconnecting with ceremony in my personal life. It's a story of how Nicki and I met. We had both already begun our personal journeys of reconnecting with ceremonies before we met each other. It's a story about the ceremonies that we undertook to prepare for the coming of our daughter, for birth, for after the birth, rites of passage. I also talk about parenting as Michif self-determination. For me personally, I reconnected with ceremonies through higher education. That's where I found opportunities to go to my first sweat lodge, my first women's drum circle. It's where I started meeting Medewan elders who took me under their wing, and I started going to ceremonies with them. So I have ceremonial families with the Three Fires Medewan, with the Minwewegan Medewan Lodge, as well as with the Blacksmith Sundance family. I share a little bit in the chapter about how I've been going to ceremonies for over 15 years, and for pretty much that long, I've also focused my scholarship in that area as well. I've published a couple books on the topic, Rekindling the Sacred Fire, and the newer one is called Returning to Ceremony, Spirituality in Manitoba Métis Communities, both of which are available for purchase. I'm currently working on my third book with a team of folks. So essentially, I've spoken with and interviewed Red River Métis people in the first book, mostly from Winnipeg, who have found their way back to ceremonies. In the second book, I focus on 6 historic Manitoba Métis communities in the province of Manitoba. And then in this third book, my team and I are looking at relationships, Métis relationships with spirituality and religion across our homeland, focusing on the prairie provinces. 4 months before our daughter was born, the World Health Organization announced the global pandemic and the world stopped. So my wife and I had a very different pregnancy and birth than we were imagining. We had to pivot, including with what we were hoping, the ceremonies that we were hoping to participate in around that time. But we still managed to find ways, and our ceremonial families assisted from a safe distance, wearing masks. For example, our Two-Spirit and trans elders started a pipe and prayer circle while we were in labor. So they said, make sure you text us when you go into active labor, and we're gonna text everyone. We're all from the safety of our homes. We're gonna drum, we'll smoke pipe. And so they did that for us, which brought a lot of comfort during a scary time, compounded by the pandemic. I also share a little bit about how about the umbilical cord burying ceremony that we did on my uncle's land in Senera, and how he prepared that for us. He dug the hole before we got there, laid out a little table for our bundle items, and wasn't there because we were freaking out about the pandemic. Like, we didn't know about transmission and what that looked like yet at that point. I share a little bit about the placenta burial ceremony that we had in Nicki's mom's backyard in Lorette. A little bit about Miday's walking out ceremony that we had in Hentelef Park in Saint Vital. All of the communities that I've mentioned are our Michif ancestral communities that we continue to have present day relationships with, and we want our daughter to have relationships with those communities and that land as well. I also mentioned her naming ceremony, which happened at the first Two-Spirit Sundance this past summer. I'm on the board for Two-Spirit Manitoba, and almost 2 years ago now, we purchased 10 acres of land in Long Plain and to dedicate specifically to 2S ceremonies. So I share a little bit about that in the book. How am I for time? Can I read a couple? Okay, so to conclude, I'll read a couple passages. Historically, some Michif in the Red River region and beyond participated in pipe ceremonies, sweat lodges, Midayawin, Sundance, prenatal and postpartum ceremonies. Colonization tried to dispossess Michif and First Nations from our spiritualities, genders, and sexualities, among other things. The consequences have been widespread, including disconnection from ceremonies, the stereotype that all Métis are Christian, and the oppression of Two-Spirit people. Fortunately, our resilience also takes many forms, including Michif and First Nations, people increasingly returning to ceremony, and Two-Spirit people reclaiming our power and place in communities. Reclaiming the sacred work of Indigenous motherhood, parenting, and the resurgence of prenatal and postpartum ceremonies are examples of Indigenous self-determination and sovereignty. Being a mother, parent, fostering, adopting, and nurturing the next generation fulfills Minoba Matazuin, a good path in life, and requires reclaiming our responsibilities as aunties, grandmothers, teachers, visionaries, and carriers of our culture. According to Simpson, self-determination begins in the womb and is linked to the sovereignty of Indigenous nations. Quote, reclaiming Indigenous traditions of pregnancy, birth, and mothering will enable our children to lead our resurgence as Indigenous people, to rise up and rebel against colonialism in all its forms, to dream independence, to dance to nationhood, end quote. My wife and I are doing our best to raise our daughter with self-determination according to Michif ways of knowing and being grounded in kinship. Reclaiming ceremonies surrounding pregnancy, birth, parenting, and rites of passage ensure our daughter will grow up securely in her identity as Michif, in her Michif family, culture, and nation, and in relationship with our Sundance, Midayawin, and Two-Spirit communities. Landry asserts, quote, our babies will grow up firm in their kinships and strong in who they are and where they come from, based on raising them as best as we can with the teachings, morals, and principles of our nations and teachings. Because this is Indigenous parenthood, and it is a force to be reckoned with, end quote. Parenting in these ways offers a path back to the ceremonies of our ancestors that make space for other Two-Spirit Michif families to do the same, as well as a path forward for our future babies. Together, we actualize Michif sovereignty and remain accountable to all our relations, including the land. Good question.
I'm not sure, so I don't know what I'm gonna do here. Okay. Chantal Fiola, Lucy Fowler, District Krishnan, Winnipeg Dushin, Maparanti, Kayash, Red River, St. John's, St. Andrews, Oxford House, Norway House, and I also have family from Sioux Valley, Dakota Nation, and a settler family from Ireland and the Orkney Islands. It's so, sorry, I got overwhelmed kind of coming up here and seeing how many people that I love are in this room. It's really incredible, and so many folks that I'm sure I would love if I knew better as well. So I'm just gonna share a little bit about my chapter in this incredible volume that I'm so thankful to Laura and Jennifer for spearheading and bringing together. I'm really honored to be featured in a book with such incredible Métis scholars. It's really kind of overwhelming itself as well to read. So my chapter is about my own search to research. What kind of research paradigm could I be finding and using? So when I first wrote this chapter, this was back kind of midway through my own doctoral program. And I was kind of still figuring things out. I wasn't quite sure where I was going with my research, what I was going to be doing. So it was really interesting to me to read back those words when they came to us for the copy editing. Oh yeah, this is all kind of still how I'm actualizing what I'm doing. And so the name for this chapter, because I'm nervous, I'm not going to speak Michif because I will butcher it, and I don't want to do that. But I asked for help from my dear friend Heather Suter, who is a language speaker, to help name the chapter because I really wanted to name the chapter in the Michif language. So my family were English-speaking Michif, so we didn't actually speak the Michif language in our family. My mom's here too, so she can verify that. But so our family didn't have that language, but I still think it's important as a Métis person to be able to reclaim and relearn that language that was shared amongst our ancestors in this place. And so I asked Heather, like, how do I say, like, I'm trying to figure out my own research paradigm, like, how do I say that in Michif? And so the term that she came up with, which again, you can read it, and I'll read it later when I'm less nervous, but it means my searching or groping around to how to research things. I think that groping around is really kind of like what research really feels like, right? We're like trying to figure out like what is going on here. So research is groping and fumbling and figuring it out. So I thought that really spoke to kind of what I was working with. So this chapter is really like a blip or a little memory from my time working in my own dissertation work. Now I work at the University of Manitoba in the Faculty of Education, which I'm really happy to be there with a lot of my colleagues are here as well, which is wonderful. And at that time, I was thinking back to my PhD journey. So in my coursework, I did my PhD at the University of Saskatchewan. I did a course on Indigenous research methodologies with Dr. Nicki Ferland. And in that class, she had us do an activity where we had to create a paradigm or like a metaphor for what research or knowledge means to us. And so for me, the first thing that came to mind was a kitchen table. And this was actually before I had even been introduced to kitchen table theories, which are throughout this book. And inspire the name of this book, and there's so many amazing scholars, but I hadn't come across it yet. And so when I came across it, I felt like coming home because that was exactly how I felt learning and knowing what it felt like to me was sitting around that kitchen table with your family. And so this chapter is a lot about kind of that metaphor of the kitchen table and speaking to my nation for things that like I want my nation and my community to be doing better, and speaking in a way of love, right? Speaking out of love, the way I'd speak to my family across that table. And so the chapter really names places that both I think are areas of growth for ourselves as a nation, but also things that I look to as pillars in my own work going forward. And so these kind of two main pillars would be queering. So I'm also a Two-Spirit Métis person. I'm the chair of the Two-Spirit Michif Local that Nicki is co-chair of. And I'm very involved in the Two-Spirit community here in Winnipeg. But I'm also a straight appearing Métis person, right? So I'm in a relationship that from the outside might look like a heterosexual relationship. And so sometimes I have to utilize that privilege and that straight passing privilege to kind of advocate for other Two-Spirit kin. It was interesting listening to Chantal speak about the cultural disruption because I talk about that in this chapter as well. especially Dr. Alex Wilson's work talking about how colonization has impacted our communities. And the other pillar that I speak to in this chapter is disrupting anti-Black racism within our communities. Because of those experiences that racialized Métis folks often have within community and not being accepted as part of our own. There's this over-proliferation of stories about people who are white-coded Métis, and I think we need to kind of shift that narrative because that's not the only experience that's out there. And the whole chapter kind of centers around this ethos of being a good relative that I'm trying to bring into my work. So how do we advocate and speak to and for other people and use that power that we have in our own? And I also kind of finish with this vision to strengthen our nation together. And all of these words are written from a place of this really deep love and respect that I have for my people and my nation. So I'm really thankful to be part of this work and to be here and have all of you read these brilliant authors with us. So I'll just leave it right there. Okay, Resi.
I'm back. I have way too many notes, so at some point I'm gonna go off book. We'll see how far I get. So Tanshi Giwao again. I wrote this chapter when I was still completing the coursework for my master's degree, and I'm now just completing the first year of my PhD. So it was several years ago, and it is really interesting to look back and see where I was and how I was feeling and thinking at that time. And my motivation for writing this chapter was that I wanted to share my own experiences as a Métis learner who was engaged in a uniquely Indigenous education really for the first time. And so in the Masters of Education program, which I'll describe in a moment, I was learning about the land through Waccochwan. I guess I should maybe tell you the name of my chapter. It's Waccochwan, an approach to Indigenous land-based education. So I was learning about the land through Waccochwan, through these like deep kinship structures and relationships that exist between all things. And I was learning about that through language, love, community, and immersive land-based experiences. And this chapter is really about the importance of relationships, relationality, and relational accountability in land-based learning, and I think also in Indigenous student success. And so relational accountability was at the core of our learning. So accountability to the land, to future generations, to Indigenous knowledges as an intervention for climate change, to my own studies and my own research, and also accountability to my peers. And my education, throughout my education, I was connected to language communities, to a community of learners who would become great friends, to a community of supportive educators, and to communities of Métis people who love the land. And so within my chapter, it kind of has 3 sections. In the first section, I introduced the Master of Education program with a concentration in land-based education, now known as the MILB, so the Masters of Indigenous Land-Based Education. I also introduced a set of sort of principles or facets of my own learning experience that form the foundation of an Indigenous education that supported my own personal and professional growth as a Métis learner. And then I really briefly introduced my own Métis-specific land-based studies and research at the end of the chapter. So I'm gonna start by just sharing a little bit about the Masters of Education program, and then I think I'll give like a very skimmy kind of overview of some of my favorite stories from the chapter, and then I'll probably invite Laura to come up and share. So I was really lucky, grateful, privileged to be a part of the University of Saskatchewan's Master of Education program with a concentration in Indigenous land-based education. The program offered intensive land-based field institutes where students take graduate level courses framed within an Indigenous paradigm taught primarily by Indigenous faculty. And the land-based courses were designed to sort of support and accommodate people who were unable to commit to being away from their homes and their communities for long periods of study. So what we did was we would go away for 2 weeks at a time, twice a year for 2 years during these field institutes to maximize sort of our contact with faculty, with Indigenous communities, and with the land. And so our cohort completed courses in Opaskwayak Cree Nation here in northern Manitoba, on the islands of Oahu and Hawaii in the Kingdom of Hawaii, in Chief Dragi's territory of the Yellowknives Dene in the Northwest Territories, as well as online. The final Field Institute, which was a super sweet canoe trip along the Saskatchewan River Delta planned for the summer of 2020, was canceled due to COVID-19, but it happens. Actually, some of our cohort members took that trip. About six or seven of them went and did it when they were able to take some time off together, which was really cool. We had just had a baby, so we weren't able to join them, but no regrets. And the Milby program, and as well as the med program that I was a part of, or my supervisor being like, it's not a med program, it's an MED. But I always say med, and she's like, it sounds like you took a medical degree. Like, whatever. We talked about this like yesterday. So the MED program is coordinated by a brilliant queer scholar and educator, Dr. Alex Wilson, who's a Two-Spirit Cree woman from Opaskwayak Cree Nation. The 2018 cohort that I was a part of included 20 graduate students. So 4 non-Indigenous students joined a predominantly Indigenous cohort, which included Métis students, Cree students, Anishinaabe, Mi'kmaq, Pueblo from Jemez Pueblo and Isleta Pueblo in New Mexico, and Kanaka Maoli, or Native Hawaiians from the Kingdom of Hawaii. And the students represented a sort of a wide range of life stages, urban reserve experiences, land-based practices and experiences, and professional backgrounds. One of my Métis peers in the cohort was actually an MMA fighter and boxer from Vancouver, who has done very cool work with their degree. So I was sort of thinking about what these major, or sort of these principles and values and major aspects of the med program were as I was writing this chapter, and I identified kind of 5 major areas. So the first was Wakotowin, or this idea of like relationality, or the centrality of kind of relationships, not only to the learning, but to, as being part of a cohort, and of developing relationships with the Indigenous faculty and community members where we visited. Another area was consent and protocol, and I think I'll share a story about that, so I won't share much about it now. The importance of sort of oral learning, the value of like utilizing Indigenous pedagogies that are grounded in specific Indigenous paradigms, and I've gone off book now, and I'm like, now I'm looking up over here, and and then finally queering pedagogy in practice. And maybe I'll like just very kind of briefly touch on all of these, maybe share a story or two, and then I'll wrap up. So Wakotowin, so Brenda McDougall, a Métis scholar, defines or talks about sort of Wakotowin, these relationships with land and each other, and the ensuing, obligations and responsibility that we have for these relationships, or otherwise known as, relational accountability, as being foundational to Métis identity. And I feel like, being a part of this cohort model where there was 20 other students who were really, really there for me, like really supportive, and that I felt such relational accountability to, in terms of, completing my degree and helping others complete, and receiving a lot of help to do, my own work, was such an important point. So I think that cohort model for me was, I think, frankly, one of the reasons maybe that I was able to be so successful in my degree while I was still sort of working full time and having a baby and being with my family and community. These relational structures, this sort of Wakotowin, also informed the land that we visited. So we really only go to places where Alex Wilson already has existing relationships, and there's something important about that, right? That we're not just dropping into communities, that we're actually being invited to places. And I think this is sort of related again to this idea of like consent and protocol, which I'd say are like pedagogically and spiritually required in Métis education and research. So Métis researcher, scholar Rob Hancock talks about Métis being like good hosts and good visitors, right? And I think we really learned how to be good visitors as part of this Masters of Education program. And part of this included sort of, again, being invited places, and when we arrived, following nation and community specific protocols. And so when we were in Hawaii, as just a kind of fun story, we had just arrived on Hawaii, the Big Island. of Hawaii, and we were visiting this radical T-shirt shop. Yes, such a thing exists, called Hawaiian Force, and we were met by the owner of that store, Luana Neff, who came out and chanted like an ole for us, which is a very much so a native Hawaiian protocol, and then told us sort of that it was a protocol that we should go and visit and make an offering to Pele, who is like a deity of the volcanoes on the island, as soon as we arrived. And so we hadn't known about this, we hadn't planned for it, we were all super exhausted from having sort of traveled over from Oahu. Everyone just kind of wanted to go home and settle in, but we were like, hey, we've gotta, follow these protocols that we've just been told from, a Hawaiian here in this community that's hosting us. And so we, drove for hours to get to the caldera of Kilauea, and we made our offerings there in these huge sort of steam vents. And for me, that experience was really this sort of pedagogical reminder of the flexibility and protocol that the land expects from us. And so, and it's something, that I've now sort of embedded within my own ways of teaching and learning. Man, I've got so many stories, but there just ain't enough time. Maybe I'll, I don't know. I don't want to, I feel like I've shared one story, but I do want to save time for Laura to come and share. And I think just want to acknowledge how important I think this collection is. I think this is the first time that I've opened a table of contents and just been like, yes, like I'm gonna read every one of you. None of these chapters are being skipped. And so I think this is such an important, okay, I've skipped we all have, okay, but honestly, this is a full reader, and I feel really grateful to be a part of this collection. And so just maybe much to Laura and the co-editor, Jennifer Markides. Thank you.
Everyone. So I get to have a chapter in here, which is really, I'm just humbled to be in this space with all of these folks. And I'll talk about how we came to this place and be spicy a little bit later. But right now I want to tell you about Métis women. I mean, we've saw incredible Métis women speak already, so you kind of know about their brilliance, but I want to talk about how it's not just today they're brilliant, that we've been brilliant forever, and how I know that's true. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about our historical roles in our community and in our history by talking a little bit. I'm not going to talk about the super spicy stuff where I attack white people. You could read that later. You don't want to be on camera maybe doing that, but I'll read the part about why I think Métis women are who they are. And so Métis nationhood, future publications coming. I'll talk about those too. But Métis nationhood and communities are built on foundational principles of Indigenous societies, which are matrilineal. Women are our leaders and always have been. Our grandmothers are who we listen to. And so I'll keep going. Don't go off script. I won't be like Nicki. I've got to stick on or I might get into trouble. So okay, here we go. So Adise and Todd, they insist that Métis-ness pushes back against colonial notions of binary truths, of male and female roles. And this is confirmed by Maria Campbell and her description of her own great-grandmother and the role that she played as head of their community, and her demonstration that women who took on these roles were respected and revered. Métis women were instrumental, as Nicki has mentioned, in the buffalo hunts, the top economic driver of the Métis Nation itself. Now, Campbell recalls her childhood and the impression that Métis women in her community made about the importance of working hard. She says, I do not remember any of them sitting around, and if they did sit, they were beaten. Diane Payman says she refers to Métis women as en femme, enfant deux, strong like two women, as women were the backbone of society. Métis women were the heads of the family, but also integral in child rearing, managing the home, acting as the traditional healers, breadwinners, midwives, hunters, translators, cultural material producers, and political strategists. Always, not now, but always. So due to their tenacity, Payment proposes work, work, and more work as a motto for Métis women. Parody or disregard for gender colonial norms is seen through much of the literature, which shows women's equality within the Métis community. So you will see that when Métis write about Métis. Further in the chapter, I talk about when white men talk about women, but and it's not the same, right? And that's why it's really important that we have a collection like this that talks about us from how we see it. Now, Emma LaRocque is one of my favorite people who has over 90 publications and has taught since the 70s at the University of Manitoba. She is incredible. She comments that her mother enjoyed working outside alongside of her dad, adding that my mom, she says, quote, my mom was free to trap and do all those other so-called masculine tasks. Politics from the Eurocentric and colonial view is male-dominated. But within the kinship networks and the Métis Nation as a whole, women made decisions as their mothers had before them. Women are foundational to early and contemporary Métis society, and thus to our identity as Métis people. So through storytelling, Métis women have intergenerationally taught Métis history to their communities, including traditional knowledge, community history, ancestral biographies, and just our ways of life. So due to this ongoing presence of empowered women throughout the Métis Nation, who defy colonial gendered approaches to all aspects of Métis identity, it's not surprising that these colonial norms do not overwhelm Métis studies. This is why this discipline is so integral to the institution, because we know how to do it. We know who to lift up. We know who is writing our stories. And they're in this book. Like, I'm so excited that they're here. Now, this chapter goes on to blame, it does some blaming, so if you like blaming, it's gonna do some of it for you. It's also gonna speak about some of the grandmothers who are not in my dissertation, so if you've read it and you're like, oh, no, you won't know these ones, because these ladies aren't in it. And so it just lifts up some of the work, like Audrey Horry. Who's that? You're gonna find out. You should know, right? You should know who Dorothy Chartrand is. We know Maria, she's in here, don't you worry. I talk about Maria Campbell too, but there are other grandmothers who have done incredible work in our communities that we need to lift up. We need to recognize that they are here, and the things that we know are because of them. They just were cited by others who didn't mention them, or we forgot about them. So now you're gonna know them because these women are in here and you can cite them directly and go through the bibliography, which we had to put at the very end because it's so powerful, of all the other women that you can read from. So, I guess we'll ask questions. So we'll just take a minute and someone will come from behind here and we'll get restructured to answer some questions if that's okay. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so we'll start a question period. I think let's invite the contributors up if you guys don't mind. That way you don't have to run up and down. If two of you want to take a seat here, and maybe two of you can share the podium. Maybe go by height so there's no
That's why I was looking for water.
That's all right.
Where am I going?
We all have
You're sitting down. You're sitting. Short people are sitting. Tall people are standing.
We'll all be the same height now.
Oh.
You're up.
You too.
Okay, yeah, so feel free to raise your hand. I'll come to you and you can address one person or the group, and then you guys can fight it out and we'll take it from there. Okay, first questions here.
Hi, this is not a question. My name's Caroline, by the way. I'm from ancestors from St. Laurent, Manitoba. I just want to thank you for referring to Buffalo, as our people always have. And I hope we'll continue to do that. I find it so tiresome to hear this word bison being used in conversation. In the scientific community, that's one thing, right? Okay, so thank you for using the word buffalo. Much appreciated.
Okay. Anybody else?
Wonderful stuff. I learned while you were talking, Laura, that it's a volume. and there's gonna be more to it. Do you want me to talk about that? Just in a general concept, like, is it more around the kitchen table? Is it more Métis women, Métis scholars? Is it, what can we expect after doing this one?
Well, Jennifer is at the University of Calgary. We have 3 other collections that have already been published, and we've sat here in this space, and they were Indigenous, and they had scholars from all over the world. And in that, we recognized that we hadn't just focused on ourselves and our community and didn't provide space for that. And so we have this beautiful thing we have in our hands. We have another collection that's coming out with Peter Lang in September that is Métis folks. We let some men write too in that one. They can come along for that ride. We have 2 other collection and calls that are coming out in the next 2 months. And Dr. Lucy Fowler and Jennifer and I are having a Métis textbook for K-12 teaching. So we can bring Métis content into the classroom. So there's a call out for that right now. I think that we're at the beginning of something very big in Métis studies, where we are able to dedicate and center ourselves around our people. We no longer have to hide under an umbrella to make it marketable. And so we're really excited. Do I think there'll be more volume 1, volume 2, volume 3? I know it. I know it, because once everyone reads this, they're gonna be so excited to just wanna know more, right? All of us, Nicki, it's on the website. All of us work on Pelotimic. So Pelotimic is a Métis journal that just debuted in September of 2023. And so there's a real like hunger, there's a thirst, I guess, for Métis scholarship. People want to read it, and there are so many Métis scholars. We, on a lark, like, I mean, my work specifically is in Métis women and Métis women scholars in the academy, and so we're kind of like, well, how many are there, right? And then we said, well, I wonder if we could list 100 of them. How long would it take us? Just out of the people we know and have a relationship with, how long would it take us? It took us 5 minutes to get to 100 Métis scholars who are women, right? That includes master's students, PhD students, and candidates, and then of course, assistant full professors, you know, AVPIs, in the academy right now, all of them. Imagine if we created space for them to write and to publish and to create like knowledge production about us. This is, I believe, just the beginning. So when I say volume, I'm manifesting what this is going to be in the future. So thanks for the question, Brett.
Anyone else?
Oh no.
Don't be shy.
Our teacher wait time is terrible. We're all teachers, right?
We can wait, we can wait.
Yeah.
We can also wrap it up unless you guys wanted to discuss any other aspect of the book, if somebody, you know, gets encouraged and wants to ask a question, but we can also move on to signing.
And I'm gonna answer one thing because they asked me on APTN and I didn't know the answer, but now I know the answer. They were like, well, how did this book come to be, right? Like, how did this be? Like, how are these women in this book? And I think one of the things that we briefly talked about, and like we'll go to and creating relationship, being accountable to those relationships we already have. And so when you have this type of opportunity, you reach out to the women you know. Right? So we know these women. We have worked with these women. We have sat in a circle with all of the women in here. So when we asked them, do you want to do this thing? Like, it was the middle of the pandemic. This was summer of 2020. They had other things to worry about. But I mentioned Métis women, they want to work for their communities, they want to lift things up. And so they all were like, yes, we will do this, right? And so it wasn't difficult to come to 22. It's difficult to not run out of space, right? For those who wanted, and then there are a lot of people who are sitting in this room that are not in this book, which will be in the second one, you know? So we just had to develop those relationships and get to that place, right? Where we can sit together and create together. So I'm really excited about all those opportunities. Now, for those of you that will read the book and then we're like, I want to know more. We're going to have Mawachito Talk, which is a 4-day conference here in Winnipeg in September. In the beginning of May, they will be shared out. It will be at the University of Manitoba. It is going to bring over 100 Métis scholars from across the country to come and talk about anything you possibly can imagine, really. It's gonna be really incredible. We had done this once before, in 2022, and over 2,000 people came to just share and be together. It was incredible. At that time, Maria Campbell had said to us, like, we're not ready to meet yet. You have to take care of your community and you have to keep them safe. And right after Omicron hit, she said, no, we don't think that's a good idea. And I talked to Christy Valcourt and she said the same. And so we had it online, but we feel comfortable. We feel that we're in a good place for this September to come together. Mawachito Talk means let's get together. And so we're really excited about the programming. There'll be evening events if you can't join us in the daytime. So there'll be other opportunities to learn more from those who dedicate their lives to uncovering these stories.
Okay, we'll have one more hand in the audience and then we'll
Hi, okay, this is a question now. So I'm interested to know, what is your definition of which Métis women are scholars? Like, what's your definition of a scholar? Like, I know, given we have an oral tradition, but the word scholar, from my own experience, comes from conventional education. So I'd be very interested to hear your answers.
Yeah, the conference and our journal is for Métis thinkers, right? And so you don't necessarily have to have a degree to be an incredible thinker and contribute to our nation and contribute to our knowledge. The women highlighted in my chapter don't have any degrees, yet they are the foundation of what we know about being Métis. So, I mean, we have degrees, so I guess we're scholars. But some people will call us that. Other people will call us artists and thinkers and mothers and sisters and aunties. So I think we just lift up thinkers. When we approached some of the folks in this book, they said, well, we can't be in that book because we're not at the academy. And I said, well, your work is at the academy, whether you like it or not. We already have, we're already using it, we're already citing it, we're already, you're here, you're with us. And you're an incredible contributor to our understanding of Métis-ness. You have to be in this book. So when you see the bios at the back, you'll see that not everyone has any formal education and are treated exactly the same as others who have many, many degrees. Thanks for the question.
If I could just add to that, I think Métis scholarship is expanding what we think of as scholars. So I think a lot of the chapters in this book are going to do that, and a lot of our work in other areas of our scholarship pushes those boundaries as well. I mentioned the third book I'm working on right now is doing that as well. So we held 2-day gatherings in historic Métis communities across the Prairie provinces and a 1-day symposia in adjacent universities, and specifically invited people with, like, Métis people with degrees, but also Métis thinkers who don't have degrees and are bringing community-centered perspectives. And in the book that's going to come from that, their voices are interspersed in all of the different sections because Métis wisdom comes from all places, not just degrees.
Okay, we have a few more minutes, so I'm going to actually read one of the questions that we actually received in the chat room from the viewers at home. So Sierra asked, what is your advice for those Métis women who are reconnecting with their identity and thus embarking on academic research but struggle with imposter syndrome?
Not that they're imposters, I'm just saying.
Oh, I see. Somebody have a response.
I mean, I think as a result of the legacy of colonization and patriarchy and sexism, folks from marginalized communities experience imposter syndrome, and like it doesn't really go away. Like I now am holding a senior administrative position at the University of Winnipeg, and I still deal with, on occasion, feeling like an imposter. But I can recognize that it's a product of these systemic barriers that I just mentioned. And fortunately, we have such wonderful community and we lift each other up. So if I'm having a rough day, I can reach out or you know what I do? I keep like a folder in my email and on my computer called kind words. And like folks strangers have emailed me over the years saying like, I feel my family's story resonates, like your books resonate with me. And I put those in my kind words. So when I'm having days where I feel like an imposter, I can read that and be like, I'm contributing in a good way, but I don't think it goes away. Well, it hasn't for me yet.
Yeah, I think I was gonna say something really similar, that it's not just sort of, you know, students in sort of early career students in their first or second degrees who experience imposter syndrome. I think this is something that doesn't necessarily you know, end like once we've, you know, gotten our degrees or completed our PhDs. There are full professors who probably experience imposter syndrome. And in fact, I read an article about that about 2 weeks ago. But I think that I agree entirely with what Chantal said, that I think it's, you know, I mean, I experienced imposter syndrome coming here today. I'm like, oh, why did they even invite me? My chapter's not as good as everyone else's. You know, and I think that, but it's this community of people, right? It's like Laura said, like we have these long-standing relationships, and our work brings us together constantly. Our, you know, our cultural identities bring us together. And I think that it's like we lift each other up. And so, you know, we look for those like good aunties and those like good friends who are going to remind us that like we're doing good work and we're doing important work. And, you know, we're always going to feel, you know, and I think this is probably something too that maybe women experience more, but you know, there's always going to be these like nerves about like, am I good enough, or is my work solid enough? And I think, you know, I look to these people and to like, you know, my friends and colleagues in the audience to remind me that like, yeah, I deserve to be here, you know, and just like you deserve to be here and they deserve to be here. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, and it's funny, on the way here, I played my hype playlist that gets me in the mood to feel okay, because I also have the same thing coming into these spaces. And I think a big part of what keeps me feeling grounded and feeling okay and like I'm doing something that matters is like this community of scholarship that we've created. The Academy can be a place that's really violent and awful for a lot of people, but like I really have insulated myself against that by creating a community of scholars that I work with, that I learn from and help teach, and we like explore this academic life together. And so I think without this circle of amazing scholars, some of who are up here, a lot of who are back there as well, just make it a place that is okay to be in, and not just okay to be in, but like a place that is giving joy to my life. And that's a place that, yeah, life-giving, exactly, a place that I want to be contributing to, and a space that I want to help bring the next generation of Métis scholars and thinkers and community members up in and celebrate. So yeah, and I also want to give a shout out while we're here to Laura for being a big part of building these safe communities. She's not going to say it, so we'll say it for her, that Laura works tirelessly for our people and always has. And so we really have to lift her up in this work because she's incredible. And so this work wouldn't exist without people like Laura. You also share a name with my mom, so it's a good name. It's a good name. So we're just really appreciative and thankful for you also, Laura.
Thank you. I just want to say something. I want us to remember we belong here. So one of the things that has happened because of colonization and patriarchy and all these things that they brought with them, sorry if you're in the audience, but is that we've forgotten who we are and where we belong. So the University of Manitoba, the first graduate was Métis. Isbister, the building, was paid for by a Métis. Like we, shout out to Megan Young, who can give you an incredible tour, as well as Nicki Ferland of the university, and tell you all of the sites of Métis in that space that they've kind of, let's say it wasn't on purpose, erased from our memories, right? Erased from our memories. The first teachers here in the Red River settlement were Métis. Louis Riel was highly educated. He wasn't the only one that was sent and had multiple degrees in schooling. And yet something happened, right? And so we all know what happened, more on chocolate. But something happened in the late 1800s that that then made us think, oh, well, Métis, they're not educated people. They're road allowance people. They don't have access to education. And we forgot that we were actually belonged in the institution, right? And so I want us to remember, Sarah, I want you to remember that you belong here, that you should have been here all along, that we should be from intergenerational families of academics and thinkers, and that was stolen from us. And so we need to rethink about where we're from. Thank you.
That's a perfect place to stop. To borrow a few words from the people who are commenting at home, it was a powerful presentation and inspiring and brilliant. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for coming tonight. We're going to proceed to the signing. So we have places for all of you to sit and sign. So yeah, we'll just ask the audience to stay for a few moments while we transport the talent over to the signing table. We will have books available at the cash desk, at the signing desk, so feel free to pick one up, get it signed, but we just ask you to pay for it before you leave if you don't mind. And we'd like to thank the University of Manitoba Press for helping putting this evening together. And thanks again to everybody.
Thank you.
Laura, 2026.